All right. So let me check my stream is healthy. All right, it's telling me my stream is healthy. I'm gonna go up here. And there it is. I'm on. I'm on. I am definitely on. And I got a good connection. All right then. We on YouTube. And the name of this topic is AANA Spiritual Principles, the elevation of a light worker. And I know I got two, so I'm going to edit that when I get off. All right, so I've done several videos on a light worker. Now, those videos are on YouTube. I think this is about the third or the fourth one. And right now, I'm stuck on the topic of a light worker until, the cup is empty, right? Till the cup is empty. And so in previous videos, I had stated that a light worker is an individual with a strong desire to help others and other people. Their consciousness is of that they are conscious of everything around them. When I say everything, I mean from the animals to the insects, to the stars in the sky, to breathing, to air, to everything. They have a growing consciousness of them and the things around them. And one thing they understand is everything is connected and everything is one. To them, it ain't no black, it ain't no white, it ain't no red, it ain't no yellow. It's not no Republican, it's not no Democrat, it's not no what other kind of parties we can ever think of. We understand that everything is one. However, there's another understanding. And that understanding is there's a lot of confusion going on. We understand that the human is made up of the mental, the physical, and the spiritual aspect. And right now, I'm going to go off into a little slight definition of that. When I talk about the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. And what I mean when I say the mental, physical, and spiritual, let me pluck through my notes right here. When I refer to the four makeups of the human being, like I said before, the mental, the physical, the spiritual, and the emotional. The mental, what I mean is the intellect, the human intellect. And you could just look that up, right? Just look it up and derive a definition from Merriam-Webster or somebody like that. And then the physical is the body, the physical body of the human. And then the spiritual is the energy, is your energy. So when I refer to the spiritual part, I don't mean your religion, your philosophical view, your whatever. I mean, it's the energy. Now let me say this. Your philosophy or your religion or your view, and you don't have to be religious. You could be an atheist or agnostic. However, your spirituality is your energy force. And then the last one is your emotional. And when I say emotional, I mean more than like just feelings, right? I mean your devotional. So when I'm referring to these four makeups of the human being, mental, the intellect, physical, the body, spiritual, your energy, and emotional, your devotional. Your devotional. This is what I'm referring to when I'm, as far as how I'm talking or this particular message that I'm carrying. Now, the healing modality that I'm referring to is called the NA and AA 12-step principles. And when I talk about NA and when I refer to AA/NA spiritual principles, what I'm referring to is the steps. It's the 12-step healing modality. The spiritual principles that come from 12-step healing. This is what I'm referring to. And inside of 12-step healing, what's happening is like when people, let me back up a little bit. When people hear about Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any other 12-step program, they tend to focus on drugs and or alcohol. Well, let me say the program is more than learning how to stop drinking or learn how to stop using some drugs. Really, all you got to do for that in that case is just stop. It's just stop. Just like Gamblers Anonymous. Anybody that got a problem with gambling and they go to Gambling Anonymous, all you got to do is learn how to stop. Like overeating, Overeaters Anonymous. Just stop overeating and stick to some type of diet plan. Sex Anonymous, going to Sex Anonymous for people who have the symptom of sexual behavior. They practice sexual behavior that's non, let's just say, they willing to, they'll jeopardize their whole life for sexual behavior, for sex, in the name of sex. So anyway, moving on. What I'm focusing on is the spirituality that comes from these programs, that's embedded in these programs. Once the individual learn how to stop what I identify as the major symptom that got them to where they are, and they just like I just listed, like alcohol, drugs, sex, food, gambling, these types of things. So anyway, moving on. Now, before I go any further, I like to say, I forgot what I was going to say, but I'm going to keep it moving. So anyway, so inside the 12-step program are embedded some principles. But let me say this. When talking about the major symptoms or the symptoms that bring the individual to the program, to any other programs or a 12-step program, a self-help program, there are the key factors that are involved. In other words, a person just don't start drinking and passing out and having blackouts to that point unless something has happened in their lives. A person also with drugs, also with food, also with gambling, also with sex, these different types of manifestations of addiction. And addiction, for simplicity, is the obsession and the compulsive behavior to use something. And I'm adding on that there's something else that's going on. There's something else that's going on with that individual, that they're using whatever these symptoms to what? To make them feel better. In other words, what I'm saying is they're using these things to cover up a hurt that's within them that have affected all 4 areas. Now, it affected 3 areas and it's manifesting in the 4th area. That inside the mental, it have affected them mentally, intellectually. Why? Because they have somehow rationalized that the symptom or symptoms that they're under, they need. That's just the bottom line. Inside the spiritual, This is where they apply all their energy to the getting and using of this symptom. And then inside the emotional or the devotional stage, this is what they devoted to. Right? It's real simple. This is what they're devoted to. And how is it manifested? It's manifested in the physical or in the body. We see it in the physical or in the body, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex, whether it's food, whether it's gambling. A person could be the type of person that works, what do you call them? Workaholics. They could be workaholics. And when all four areas are affected, as I just explained, how I just explained, then the human or the person or the individual has no power of themselves. In other words, they're not themselves. They're not themselves. They have fallen under the influence of their symptom, and I'm saying the symptom, so bad that they have actually become another person. And it's like a Dr. Jekyll type, Mr. Hyde type thing. And until they, now let me say this, let me back up a little bit. So something that I mentioned earlier, I said something happened to them in their lives that caused them to pick up a symptom and get very, very comfortable with their symptom. And when I say something, I'm gonna put a name on it. And that name is called trauma. They have had a traumatic event that happened in their lives that has caused them to, well, they feel so bad that they need something to make them feel so good. And or they have felt so bad that not only do they need something to make them feel good, they want to forget. Yeah, they want to forget. So, and I said trauma. I brought up trauma. Now, there's 3 types of trauma. So I'm going to go over those 3 phases of trauma that the individual have experienced. And then in the first one, we talk about acute trauma. Now, inside acute trauma, this results when the individual has experienced a stressful or dangerous event. And it's just one event. They might have lost their life or they could have got molested or raped. They could have seen something, a murder or extreme violence could have happened. They could have witnessed, or it could have happened to them one time. And then it could have took them to the point where they've experienced this type of trauma and they went on with their life. And then at some point they engaged into the food, the sex, the drugs as a result of dealing with trauma. Then we move on to the next one. And inside the next one is called chronic trauma. And inside of chronic trauma, this comes from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. Let me read that again. It says chronic trauma. This comes from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. So that means that the individual, whereas acute trauma is just one incident that took the person into a trauma that turned their lives, and when I say lives, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, into a tailspin. In this instance of chronic trauma, what has happened, the person experienced an event that was traumatizing over and over and over again. And then I'm gonna use the same examples where in acute trauma, the person may have been raped just once, or they may have witnessed some violence domestically, or it may have happened to them one time. The person with acute trauma had the situation happen over and over and over and over again, and there's no how many times this certain thing could have happened, and as a result, they turn to drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, overeating, workaholic to deal with, and these are the symptoms of the addiction, of the obsessive behavior that resulted from the trauma. Now, the third one is complex trauma. Complex trauma. And inside of complex trauma, the results from exposure to multiple traumatic events. Now notice they went from one specific event, and then and that was called acute trauma. And then inside of chronic trauma, this comes from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. From highly stressful events, bullying, domestic violence, rape, exposure to angry personalities. In complex trauma, the person's life they have experienced multiple they've had multiple exposures. They could have rape, angry individuals, not eating on a regular basis, homelessness, so they could have had multiple situations going on that they were traumatized by. And so moving on with the trauma situation, their trauma in all three cases have affected the person mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And it's manifested in the spiritual sense. So moving on with this, the person uses their primary symptoms as a means of escape because they have something going on called denial that they do not want to face. That their trauma was so great that if they look at it and face it, the fear of looking at that could hurt them. Yeah. They might commit suicide. They might want to OD. They might drink themselves to death, eat themselves to death, have promiscuous sex until they die, Now, there may be other forms of help they can get, They may have been, went to counseling or got saved or whatever. Coming from a 12-step perspective, though, this is what happens. Inside the 12-step perspective, one looks at their primary symptom. And then at some point, the primary symptom, whatever it is put down. And once that is put down, we begin to rebuild spiritually, that's new energy, emotionally, devotion, and mentally, on the mental side, and intellectually. Now check this out. Inside of denial, which is a system, it's looked at as a system. It's more. It affects the intellect, the mind. That's where it's seated at, inside the intellect. And so until the primary symptom is put down, then the intellect has to be dealt with. In other words, we got to look at this person and say, all right, we got to deal with your denial. We got to help you to look at your denial so you can stop rationalizing. And that's what the mind does, is or the intelligence. The intelligence rationalizes why the person should do or need to do what they're doing, or even why they're doing it. You understand what I'm saying? So the primary symptom, the primary hurdle, I'll say, is denial, which is defended by the intellect, if that makes any sense. Denial is defended by the intellect. And this will be the first wall of defense of the addiction. And it's also the first line of defense for the symptom, or for justifying and rationalizing the system. The symptom. So until the denial is dealt with, and I'm gonna tell you, it won't be, it won't just go away, because a person can come out of denial one day and be right back in it 5 minutes later. So there's desire and denial, and the desire will come through two phases, through the two other makeups of the human being. And one of it will be through the spiritual and the emotional, the spiritual energy and the devotional, or the emotional. Yeah. So that being said, and I hope I made a little bit of sense, because see, what I'm going through is how the light worker emerges. And let me say this is not, every light worker don't come through this phase, but I'll say this, the majority do. The majority do. Because most light workers have come through some form of trauma, whether it was acute, chronic, or whether it was acute, chronic, or complex. Yeah, that's right. That's a fact. You put your money on it. So anyway, what I'm establishing is where or how the light worker emerges, where they're coming from. So at some point, they deal with, or they grow actually from what I just stated, from the circumstances that I just stated. So they came from a traumatic event. They were using or they had a primary symptom: drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, overeating, workaholic. So they emerged from that. And it just wasn't simple either. It might have took a lot of work. So they emerged from that, and then what happened is inside the 12-step process, they came and they dealt with their denial. They learned to use the principle of honesty, the principle of open-mindedness, the principles of willingness. And this is how they came through their denial, by using these three principles. And then as a result, from steps 1 through 12, they extract other principles. And what happens is, on all four levels, the mental, the spiritual, the emotional, and the physical, they have learned how to rebuild themselves spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And this is just like the short story. So this is what happened. And then as a result of growing, at some point, they have an urge, what? To help others. Now, I ain't saying everybody inside the 12-step process do this. But as a result of a spiritual awakening that they have, they want to reach out and they want to help somebody else. And also what I believe, well, what my experience is that not only did I want to help somebody else, what I found out is that helping people helped me to grow. And let me get my tea right here. Yeah, I got some tea and honey right here. All right. So now, as a result, this is what happened. So now the individual, they want to help somebody else, and it may be a result of, inside the environment of the 12-step fellowships, or at the their place of employment in their household. They learn to apply spiritual principles. Now, here's another thing that happened. This is what I call the basic recovery. Just the person, they just become the everyday Joe. Now, something happens to other people, to another group of people inside the recovery process. Some of them, as a result of the 12-step program, they build a foundation and they turn into preachers and pastors, rabbis, imams. They go into different philosophies like yoga, or they'll go into like Reiki. They'll become Reiki masters, go into Tai Chi. They'll go into different other modalities of healing. And I'm not saying everybody, but I'm just talking about the ones that are motivated from the 12-step model. And I look at the 12-step model as a healing modality, in which it is, because the 12-step model have healed have healed millions of people, millions. And I'm not just talking about one fellowship. I'm talking about all the fellowships as a whole, because of what I believe as an individual is that nothing is separate. I believe that all of the 12-step programs are one. It's just the people that's carrying the message. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness is the same as it's going to be in AA, as it's going to be in NA, as it's going to be in Fellowship Anonymous, as it's going to be in Cocaine Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Sex Anonymous, and Fellowship Anonymous. Any 12-step program. Why? Because spiritual principles are never in conflict. They're never in conflict. They're universal. That's a fact. Honesty means the same thing in China that it means in the United States, that it means in Korea, that it means in the United Arab Emirates, that it means in Arabia, that it means in Africa. They're all the same. Now, and I'm gonna stick with that. So I'm gonna move on, and I'm gonna talk about Ish. Y'all know who Ish is? If you ever been to Germany, Ish is I. So I'm gonna talk about me, man. I'm gonna talk about me and my journey. So what has happened with me in my 34 years in recovery, and being influenced by the 12-step principles and various 12-step programs, I have to add, AA, NA, adult children, Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, and so forth. Yes, I've been through quite a few of them. in my 12-step journey. So what has happened is, what has happened with me is I ran across different modalities, and they're not different. And let me say that, like I said, when you look at the spirit or the spiritual side of the recovery, it's called the energy. When you look at yoga, yoga means one, and we talking about one energy. When you talk about the four different yogas, one is more focused on intellect, one is more focused on physical, one is focused on emotional, one is focused on the spiritual, the mental, the physical, the emotional, and the mental. But however, one cannot do without the other. In order to be a complete yogi, you have to deal with all four phases. In order to be into recovery, as far as the 12 steps is concerned, you have all four makeups of the human being must be online: mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. So at this point, I want to read something right quick. Let me disappear for a second, and I'm back. And let me go to page 73 inside this book right here, and I want to read something. And it says this: 73. It's on page 83. So let me move over here to page 83, and let me read this. And so, inside this book, and this is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that I'll be quoting this from, and it says, the spiritual life is not a theory, and it says we have to live it. And who is this we? It's the people that's on the recovering, that's inside the recovering, that's on the recovery path. It says we have to live it. And then it goes on to say, unless one's family express a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. And so what it's saying is that my family members around me, don't push spirituality on them. And I'm not. I don't. I'm not. And when I say spiritual principles, I'm talking about unconditional love, honesty, open-mindedness, willingness. I wrote a few down. Let me see if I can actually find them right quick. I wrote a few down. Oh, here it is. And so the principles I'm talking about is love, hope, service to others, charity, compassion, patience, tolerance, honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, anonymity, being empathetic, and there are many others. But these are the ones that I kind of like did a little slight inventory on myself for. And so back to what I was reading, this I don't push spirituality. I might come out with a suggestion or two, or something of opinion, but I'm not going behind nobody in my family, whether it's my kids or my wife or whatever, talking about, you should live this way. No, because part of that is not accepting others for who they are. And then one of the first things that I learned in recovery is that I had to learn how to accept me. It's called self-acceptance. And when I say accept me mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Accept my character defects, my shortcomings, and also accept my strengths and my hopes, man. And what that entailed was look at myself, my past, because a lot of people don't want to look at their past. But you got to look at your past in order to know where you came from. And I looked at the people around me, my caregivers, mother, father, sister, brother, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends. Yeah, everybody got a good look. And my relationship with them and what it meant, the things that I picked up from them, and the things that I needed to get away from. I looked at my own trauma, and I had some trauma in my life. I had acute, I had chronic, and I had the third one. What was the third one? It was acute, chronic, and then the one that you had just so much stuff happening to you at one time. And to the point where, I had became suicidal, very suicidal. And then at one point, I became homicidal. Yeah, I wanted to hurt some people. Yes, that's right. I did, man. I wanted to do some serious stuff to some people. And I will add, went after them. So if I ain't come for you, then you didn't. If me and you didn't have no conversation about certain things that I was traumatized by, it was serious, but it wasn't that serious. I had to say that. And some people was dead and gone. So there was other things that I had to do. So now moving on to the topic is the elevation to light workers, 12-step principles and the elevation. So what happened was the 12-step principles that I learned inside the 12 steps changed me. They changed me on all, and they didn't change me. Let me take that back, because I reverted. I reverted back several times to something that I thought I was that I never would be. I thought I was that guy, that gangster, whatever, and that clever person. But what happened was the 12 steps gave me a reality check into something that I thought I was that I never was. That's how that was. And so moving on, inside the 12 steps gave me a foundation for living, right? And then one day, I was introduced to. I wanted to grow spiritually, just keep it real simple. I wanted to grow spiritually. I wanted to grow to a whole nother level of recovery, and then I start. And I wasn't seeking. I didn't seek out nothing. Stuff just started coming my way. Different things started happening, and my biggest influence was when I had went to Africa. When I had went to Africa, and I had like 30-something odd years, when I went to the motherland, and I went to Goree Island, and Goree Island was one of the places where they. Now let me back up a little bit. I had about like 2 years clean. And I went to one of the camps where they had burnt Jews at, the Jewish people, where Hitler, when I was in Germany, I had went to one of the camps. I had went to Auschwitz. And I remember being on the train, going into the camp, and looking around and taking the tour, and actually going into one of the places where they housed in one of the barracks, and looking in there, man, and seeing the writings that people had wrote, like the year and the names of people, and it was just, the feeling was, I cannot describe it. I cannot describe that feeling to the day, but I felt a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And then I went into one of the stoves. You know, you can go into like one of the ovens, right? And everybody didn't want to go in, but I went in. I did. And I had went in and I stood in the middle of one of the rooms. I looked on the floor, and I'm talking about the ovens, one of the ovens. I went to one of the oven parts, and the blood was on the floor, and it was cold. It was a cold chill that ran through my bones. And up to that point, I had never felt nothing like that before. And yeah. And then I want to back up. After that experience, I had went to Oklahoma. I had, you know, because I was in the Army, you know. So I had went to Oklahoma. And I had went to the place where they had kept Geronimo. And I had traveled some of the part of the Trails of Tears. And that was another one that really got me. And I was really emotional. And I'm like 2 years clean, you know, 2 years in the program. You know, it wasn't quite 2 years, but I had done some step work and I got in touch with some stuff. But anyway, when I was on the Trail of Tears, and when I went to the place where Geronimo lay, and it was like a little small house in Oklahoma, and you know you could look out there, and the buffaloes was like right out there. You was a stone's throw from the buffalo. So I'm out there, you know. And I go in the house, and I sat at the table where Geronimo sat at, and I felt a very lonely presence. I felt a very lonely presence. So anyway, moving on. My next experience was that in Africa. You know, I had went to Africa, and I had went to I don't, you know, I got an old man thing, but I went to Gorée Island off the coast of Senegal. So I went to Senegal, and I went to Gorée Island, and that's where the slaves was. One of the places where the slaves was dispatched. The other one was in Ghana, and I haven't been there. But when I was on Gorée Island, and I went to that island, and I went to, and I saw the process of how they turned people into animals, to niggers. That's what I'm gonna call it. Exactly what it is. They start the making of a nigger, you know. Then and I'm telling you, man, I went through some of those stations, how they separated the children, how they separated the men from the women, and then if you didn't break, how they throwed you in the ocean, you know, the Atlantic Ocean. So anyway, let me come up off that. So, but what those experiences taught me was a spiritual principle called empathy. And it also activated something inside my own DNA. And now, at this time, when I'm at Gorée Island, I'm like 30, okay, I got 34 years. I'm like 31 years clean, 31 and a half, 32 years clean. So it was like 2 years ago I went. Matter of fact, it was 2 years ago, 2018, when I went. And it was this time, it was October. I was in Africa. So anyway, that's part of my spiritual journey. But between the time I went from Auschwitz all the way to Africa and to Oklahoma, I'm still in the 12-step process. And I'm learning about spiritual principles. Then I had to say, I went to Detroit, because I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I was in Detroit for like 13 years in recovering. And I had some good examples. I had some good examples of people that helped me to recover, and some of them has passed away, and, some of them is, like Sandra F. and, a few other ones. Then I had like Mike Johnson, and I ain't gonna sit around here and talk about like I ran with these people. I didn't. I was more of a background person, a person in the background. And I sat there and I learned and I watched and I took notes, and I learned what recovery was. I thought about William Myers the last second, and Aaron G. and cats like that, men and women. And so here I am today, man. It's 34 years, about 5 months and some change later, that I'm doing this. I've been married 5 times. I'm on my 5th one. I'm learning how to live, learning how to have a relationship, and hanging in there. So anyway, talking about being elevated to a light worker. So the 12 steps brought me into the light. And the practice of the 12 step itself, that said, haven't had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to addicts or alcoholics or gamblers or whoever you want to call it, and practice these principles in all our affairs. And the principles were the principles that was learned in the latter steps. So what happened was, at some point, I began to go to the next level from the 12-step, coming from the 12-step modality of healing. Then I started getting off into Reiki. I had my first Reiki reading from a lady here in Indiana. Her name is Goldie, and she had been practicing Reiki for a while. She gave me a Reiki atonement. She attuned me, and and she gave me a reading. First, she gave me a reading, and when she gave me that reading, she scanned my body, and she, got my energy alignment up, dealing with my chakras and so forth. First, let me back up. Before I had got to Goldie, there was another lady in Chicago, and I don't know her name. My wife, she knows her name. We went, and I got a chakra alignment and grounded. The lady grounded my chakras, aligning them up, and I really felt my spirituality. I felt in alignment with the cosmos. Then from there I went to Goldie, and then Goldie gave me the Reiki. So my chakras aligned. I had been practicing my spirituality from the 12 steps as a 12-step practitioner. I go to the lady in Chicago. She aligns my chakras. She grounds me. I go to Goldie, and I get my reading. And also the lady in Chicago taught me how to align chakras and cleanse and purge them. So that was my first, inside this modality here. Now moving on, and I don't want to give this too much thought because I'll trip my own self up like I'm beginning to. So I'm going to move on. So moving on is what happened was I meet Goldie, or, through my wife. She gives me the Reiki treatment. So I get a Reiki treatment. She scans my body, get a little purge. She tells me some stuff about myself. All right. Then I meet this lady named Amy here in Indianapolis. And she gave me my Reiki 1 attunement. Yeah. But I had been to Goldie first. So Goldie wasn't doing any classes. We meet Amy through a co-worker of mine. I gets my attunement in Usui Reiki. All right, fine. So now I'm a Reiki 1 practitioner. Then after about a year later, Goldie gives a class. You know, she's a Reiki master. I get my Reiki 2 attunement. But she still gives me a session, right? So she give me a session, I comes back maybe a month or two later, and then I get my Reiki 2 attunement. Now I go to Atlanta. And I take a class with the Grand Trine, Master Yao. And with Master Yao, I start getting off into their system, the Grand Trine system I'll talk about that one a little bit later, because actually I did forget the name of it because I don't practice it a lot. So I move on and I start learning from the Grand Trine was another modality. Then I moved on the following a few months later, and then I get off into the Kundalini. Come back about 6-7 months later. 9 years gone from Goldie, and I go to. Now I was going to go to, which was this year in March. I was going to Puerto Rico to get my master's in Reiki, or my 3rd degree in Reiki. And what happened? COVID hit. Couldn't go to Puerto Rico. Couldn't get my 3rd. So I end up going to North Carolina to a retreat, and where this sister attuned my wife and myself as a 3rd degree master. And that's what's happening. You know, and so as a result, now this is where I'm at. You know, this is where I'm at. So that's how I came. That was my journey to light worker. And man, I can't think of that. What is it called? And I, you know, I should shout upstairs and ask my wife, and I ain't gonna do that. So anyway, so moving on. This is where we are now. You know, this is where we are, or where I am. So from the 12 steps to Reiki Master to Kundalini Yoga. Mm-hmm. Tantra, that's what I took. See, look, bam, bam. So I went to Master Yao, and I got involved into Tantra. I got involved with Tantra. I took the class, and so I went from 12 steps, healing from the 12 steps, into having my chakra alignment, basic chakra alignment, and, you know, having my energy cleared, stuff like that, into Reiki 1, 2, and then between 1 and 2, I became a Tantra practitioner, which I don't practice a lot, but I do understand the movement of the energy, because in my mind, it's really no different than Reiki. It's just another level of Reiki, and that's just how I see it, and that's how I practice it. You know, I understand that other people got other definitions or views on it about it, what it has to do with sex, but I think Tantra is a very misunderstood science, you know. And if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it, because you can hurt not only you can hurt somebody else, you know. But I will practice it, Tantra. I will. You know, I will practice it very, very, you know, I do have it on on my, you know, inside my healing type, how I say, on my resume. Since it's on my resume, I'll practice it, you know. And also, so moving on, being cleared. I want to talk about being cleared. One has to be clear in order to practice any of these modalities from 12 steps on up. The individual has to be clear. And what they have to be clear from is their resentments, their angers, and their fears. They have to be, you got to get clear from your past, number one. And then being clear from your past, you got to get your present in order. And how you do that is through spiritual principles. You have to align yourself with spiritual principles. I mean, if you not getting high for it, okay, but first you have to put your primary symptom down. Whether it's sex, drugs, alcohol, food, gambling, because what happens is, long as you practicing your primary symptom, you'll never be spiritually fit to do anything because your disease is active. It's active in the physical state. And then moving on from the physical, now once you put that down, you have to learn how to practice spiritual principles of self. So once you purge self of your character defects and your shortcomings, the first thing you're going to have to deal with is denial. And denial is lying to yourself. And what that does is that blocks your chakras, your energy. It interferes with your energy. Because one of your primary chakras that the energy flows from circularly will interfere with your healing, with your ability to heal. And you can't heal. And one of your primary culprits will be denial, lying to yourself. That's right. You be lying to yourself. And so in order to be any type of healing practitioner, you can't be lying to yourself. Because what happens inside the healing modality, inside the 12-step modality, and inside the Reiki modality, the Tantra modality, and inside is what's happening is you're being used as a vessel to manipulate energy. And you are used as a vessel from the highest power is coming through you. But if you lying, your energy is blocked. So therefore, you're going to be on self-will. You're going to be dealing with people on self-will, man. So what you have to learn, so what you have to do is learn how to free yourself. You know, and that's dealing with your guilt, your shame, your anger. Yeah. If you out here running around here and you can have the classes, get the certificates, all of that, man. But if you still dealing with resentment, anger, fear, and stuff like that, that's going to affect you as a healer, as a light worker, because you still operating in shades of darkness. That's what's happening, you know. So anyway, moving on, and I ain't going to stay on this too long because I got to go to bed and I got to go to work. But I wanted to come back here and I wanted to talk about the AANA spiritual principles and the elevation to light workers coming from those modalities, because people come from different other modalities. They can come from church. They can come from, let me back up. They can come from the religious, from any of the different religions and philosophies and step into the light workers modality. Step into a light worker practitioner. Sure, that can happen. So anyway, my name is Suni. I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to play this video. And I hope I made some sense. It's like 11:20. I've probably been talking for an hour. So I'm gonna ask y'all, how'd y'all like what I was putting down? It was funny. Oh my God. Is it any other comments? Yeah. All right, so I'll be signing off. The title of this particular one is called AANA Spiritual Principles. It's called AANA Spiritual Principles. The elevation to light workers. And hopefully I'll be talking about, I ain't gonna say hopefully. You know, I've been on light workers. This is my third video. And you know, that's because I am a light worker. And I accept that. You know, a lot of people don't, you know, people distance. And I'm gonna tell you, when you do this type of work, be prepared to have yourself distance. The people gonna distance themselves from you. And that's okay, man. That's okay. You know. So anyway, I'm about to end this stream in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And yes, and I'm